everything you're building here right now, right? Do you want the government to tell you how to do all these things and all the regulations that you got to have your electric thing this far from this and like all
Well,
of
the regulations like that for construction are important, though. You do have to make sure that people don't do stupid shit.
But
Make sure you
generally,
don't have a power line that's near a water line. There's a lot of.
but I would put most of that on the builders, though. They want to build things that are good. Now I get it.
Oh, that's not true. Listen, people
No, people are
cut
going to build
corners all the time. Like, you have to have regulations when it comes to construction methods, or people are going to get fucked.
They cut corners when there are regulations anyway.
They do. They would cut a lot more if there weren't regulations.
I'm not
You go
totally-
to third world countries and look at construction methods. They're fucking dangerous.
Yeah.
That's why schools collapse on kids in foreign countries sometimes. Like,
Well, I'm not telling you that I'm against all regulation, period. That's
Okay.
that's where I said intellectually I like that argument because you could make I think you can make a very sound argument that competition would force people to do better work. Like if you're a plumber, you have a vested interest in doing the best plumbing job you can so that people will rate you on Yelp so that you will get more work. You don't have a vested interest in cutting corners. Now you might, right? You're going to push it as much as you can to save as much time and energy and money as you can.
Mm-hmm.
But once you go over that edge, yeah, you don't want to be known as the guy that you tighten something too much so that you flooded the house, or when you're building a house.
you're thinking logically, though. When people fuck things up and short things and do things terrible, they're not thinking logically.
But
They're
I don't think
just
it's the government.
shitheads.
I don't think it's the government that they're like, the government gave me this regulation, so that's why I'm going to do it right.
Well, if
You know
they
what I
didn't
mean?
have any regulations, there'd be no incentive whatsoever to do it right.
No,
If
there
they
would
knew
be an
that-
incentive.
If they knew there were no inspectors, no one was going to check their stuff and make sure that their stuff was up to code. Listen, man, I was in construction my whole life. My dad was an architect.
Yeah.
I've been in construction since I was a little kid. You fucking need regulations. These guys, a lot of people that are in construction, they'll do whatever the fuck they can to make money, and it's not good for the people that have the house because they might have that house for 5-10 years before that problem manifests itself.
If I were to just say something about that really quick, I like how Joe Rogan is sort of like Schrodinger's right winger these days.
So who's the right winger and who's the left winger?
Exactly. That's exactly my point. It's like they're always like trying to trash talk Joe Rogan for being like right or right adjacent, but now he's suddenly the hero of this story or something. I don't know.
Because you know what Dave Rubin is, right? I'm
No.
pretty sure Dave Rubin is
I've
a Christian.
I've seen like Dave Rubin like in like a couple of like interviews that I didn't.
Rubin. He's not. He used to be left. He is gay, and but he's apparently been dabbling in libertarianism. He's more libertarian now. Hence the half-baked sort of libertarian ideas that he's thrown out.
I'm still confused. Who is the right winger in that argument?
I guess it would technically be Dave Rubin. Because
it's definitely Dave Rubin because he's the one that's supposedly getting like raped in this one, right? So he's clearly supposed to be the right winger, and like you said, Schrodinger's right winger. Just because it's convenient, they're using Joe Rogan as their leftist heavyweight here. So
are you serious? My
yeah,
God.
yeah. This is how bad this video is. So what I would say coming out of the gate here is that supposedly Dave Rubin has been getting better at arguing libertarian ideas, but you can kind of tell he's a bit shaky here, right? He's sort of when he's arguing, he says contractors cut corners now, even with regulations, and that doesn't support your argument. That's not not something good to come out with. What I would say is I actually agree with what Dave Rubin's saying. He's just not arguing it very well. I think that what he should have said was that these government regulations allow you to cut every single corner except for the ones that you're not supposed to cut. Idealistically, I would see what he says here where Yelp is this decider. I get it's hard. It's hard to be an active consumer. I'd rather just sort of sit back, let drool go down the side of my mouth and pretend that I'm totally safe because the government's going to be taking care of me. But look, what I would rather have is be able to do a lot of research and find who is the best contractor, who does the best construction jobs, who is who has the best values, and who is sort of like, you can find a construction worker who takes his job as seriously as an art form, and any construction worker that fucks up that badly would never work again, right? They would be
Mhm.
They
the
would be.
yeah, you fuck up bad enough, you'll never work again if you have a consumer base that's actually um,
Mhm.
engaged with the market.
And I think that kind of segues into a decent point. So like I wouldn't subscribe to this degree of deregulation personally, but if I were to put my academic hat on it or something and try to argue from a different point of view and try to advocate for libertarianism along those lines, I would say that like I would try to find a way to um find a better way that the free market could actually um regulate how contractors do their work, and it shouldn't just be like, oh yeah, Yelp. It needs to be something better than Yelp. It needs to be something that matches or outperforms tangibly the um basically government oversight,
Yeah, of course.
and without explicitly defining that you're pretty much your arguments dead on arrival, and that's basically it's very rudimentary uh, understanding of libertarianism, I think.
So here's the first thing I want to say about that. What we just saw. The whole Joe Rogan being the champion of the left is kind of
In this instance,
it's
anyway,
it's
not
kind of dumb
not
because
as a
I
not as
see
a
that,
rule.
and I've listened to Joe, and every time Joe has argued, he's just argued from an absolute point of just nonsensicalness. He's arguing for the point of arguing. He's becoming a straw man essentially. And when taking in this context of the video, it just looks like he's being, tough, he's being strong, he's being stubborn, whatever you want to call it, or he's defending what's right to some people, to some people's perceptions. But it's really he was just saying over and over, complete deregulation is bad, and the whole entire time Dave Rubin was saying over and over, yeah, yeah, complete. I'm not saying about complete deregulation. I'm just saying too strict regulation is too much. And then Joe just immediately took that as, oh, so you want to deregulate everything? It's a lazy leftist argument, and he does that on purpose because he's trying to represent lazy leftist arguments in order to defeat them, in order to show that. But because of this clipped context, it looks really dumb. And that's the idea of leftism or regressivism, what do you want to call it, that people don't pay attention enough to be able to figure out the truth. And most of the time, it works.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Whole deregulation argument aside, I just think that probably the balance is the best option. And like, don't make it so that they can just build a wooden shack, but also don't make it so that you have to make them count every single and every nail there is. People have
yeah,
been
I don't.
building stuff for centuries. They can handle it. Sure, you gotta set some rules, but don't go overboard.
Maybe, maybe not. I flip flop a bit on. I mean, this is like, I'm not an anarchist. I don't think Dave Rubin is an anarchist, but that's sort of like an anarchist argument. And like, why shouldn't they be able to build a wooden shack that's gonna fall apart if somebody's gonna pay for it? And then if if you pay for that shit and it falls apart on you, that's kind of your fault. At the same time, we people should be paying for. I think that like this idea of weeding out bad contractors with this sort of Yelp, not saying that it would be Yelp exactly, I think would also drive up wages as well. I mean, you're gonna pay more to know that you're getting like the best work done.
To that, I just say, so I've also briefly worked in construction as well, and let me just say, there's no point in that. Personally, myself, I wouldn't trust Yelp, only as a last resort. My boss, he used like a third-party website that picked jobs for him. Basically, they advertised his work number, and he got calls.
But
And
Yelp
that's
is
was.
when I talk about Yelp, and I think what he's saying with Yelp is it's almost like a stand-in for an engaged consumer base. I think the problem is when you get complacent. Like you're thinking, or someone might think the government is going to keep me safe so I don't have to actually do the legwork on figuring out who's a good contractor and who's not a good contractor.
So, as I said before, my boss used a third-party website. This website, what essentially it did is it was paid membership. So you paid in order to find out who the best contractors are for every single job you need.
Hmm.
I remember what the website was. I don't want to dox myself, so I'm not going to say any more details. But I'll tell you guys about it later.
Okay.
It's probably not anywhere. You know what? I should stop talking. My point being, there's room for competitiveness because you got to realize they're all fighting for this set amount of consumer base in the example I brought up.
Um, so I'll give my verdict, and I think this is another shit show because we got Dave Rubin arguing from an opinion that he doesn't even hold himself, and then kind of folds even when making that argument. And so this could just be an exercise of sharing ideas. But why is that worth showing as some sort of like leftist owned? It's just fucking not. So I'll give it a shit show out of 10.
It's hard to say that Joe Rogan owned Dave Rubin just because he was mostly just asking questions and sort of like correcting sort of like some trying to challenge some of the stuff that Dave Rubin was saying. But at the same time, Dave Rubin like doesn't really seem to have um, a well informed perspective on this issue, and I think that that's a bit of an indictment against him. So I feel like I'm again a little bit on the fence between shit show and self own on Dave's part.
Mm.
So I think actually Dave won, but not by a lot. Like if we're talking about how much he won by like 0.5 points. And that's literally because Joe Rogan had zero point 0.0 points. And what I mean by that is, like I said before, this is just a show. It's a farce. Joe Rogan was just arguing for the point of arguing. I've seen him do it before. And if he wasn't in this case, who knows what he thinks now? He'll probably change his mind or something. I'm not saying that on him. I'm just saying, people change their minds all the time. What I would say here in this circumstance is Rubin had an argument which was balanced, and he didn't argue that well, and I'll give you guys that. I feel like if he really wanted to ram his point home, he would have said at some point, "You're just arguing from a point of complete deregulation. I'm saying that there's balance." He didn't argue that at all, and I think that's where he failed. But at the very least, he attempted to try and make that argument, whereas Rogan was just spitting out complete deregulation or complete regulation, either or. There's room for middle ground. You don't have to make it that way. If you do make it that way, I personally think that people are really stupid like that because think about it this way. A computer thinks that way, ones and zeros, and it's only so smart. Humans are better. Why? Because we know that there's, middle. And if you only think in black and white, you'll never get anywhere.